It's preparing. These are the kind of things you would figure we would have worked out ahead of time.
You know.
It's live? And is my saying it's live? It's preparing. These are the kind of things you would figure we would have worked out ahead of time.
You know.
So I guess there's a bit of a delay. It's live? Okay. Is my saying it's live? We're live now. Let me just close this YouTube tab. Okay. Good evening, folks. I'm an idiot, apparently. If you are joining us or if you're watching this at a later date, my name is Alex DeVore. I'm the culture editor for the Santa Fe Reporter, and tonight we are kicking off our Bring a Friend series. It's a little bit of a service to you, the public. It's a little bit of a shameless, y'all should give us money kind of thing. It's going to be a series of conversations with people who we consider to be notable Santa fans. We are in no way saying they're the only notable Santa fans, but tonight we're kicking things off with Jess Clark, who is the Education and Prevention Manager at Solace Crisis Treatment Center, and he also works with Girls Inc. and the Santa Fe Public Schools. It's the Equity and Diversity Council. So Jess, hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was telling you before, I'm here in the beautiful mountains of Santa Fe. Jess, I kind of thought we could start a little bit with talking about what it is that you do at Solace Crisis Treatment Center. With everybody locked down, quarantined, you know, there's the introverts who are saying, this is great, I've been waiting for this for years, but it's not always necessarily a great thing for everybody.
Yeah, so Solace, for those folks who don't know, Solace is Santa Fe's rape crisis and trauma treatment center or sexual assault service center. So we have therapy and advocacy all at no cost, all bilingual. And in my department, which is preventions, we're in the schools from 4th grade to 12th grade and college and beyond, community organizations, government agencies, we will work with you, let's do it. But as far as how the lockdown, pandemic, quarantine and such are affecting individuals in terms of violence, we know that violence is bred in isolation, that especially intimate partner sexual violence is bred in isolation. And so when folks are locked in a home, not locked in a home, they're in a home with people who are causing them harm, that's only exacerbated by not having access to others in the outside world. One terrible, appropriate example of that is every year when the schools come back from summer break, there's an increase in reporting of child abuse every single year. So we're and that's because young people are suddenly with adults outside of their home who they have different kinds of relationships with, different levels of trust with, and disclosures come out. So we're anticipating that when schools go back full force, that there's going to be just an explosion of disclosures and reporting, and we're going to be very busy.
So at that point, when you learn those things, like people have to approach Solace themselves, correct? But at that point, once a place like Solace is brought in, like what happens? What are steps that can be taken to address these issues?
Well, first, folks need to, especially if it's a young person, if it's a child, know what to say when a child discloses to them, to say, when they say, hey, I've been hurt. I like to give people a script, which is telling that child, thank you for telling me, which just gives you a second to think about, what am I going to say next? I believe you. The rest of this is going to sound like an after school special, but all of these things work, and they work against, especially a child who's been groomed to believe that no one will believe them, that people will think they're lying or that it was their fault. So I believe you. This wasn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. There's help out there. I have to get help for you, especially if it's a child. I have more things on my script that aren't in front of me. But knowing what to say to the child and then getting the help, which means reporting to statewide central intake. I don't have that number with me right now, but you can Google statewide central intake, which is CYFD. And at that point, a forensic interview is done of that child more often than not. Forensic interviewing is we talk to kids instead of kids talking to law enforcement. So instead of kids talking to law enforcement where they might think that they've done something wrong, that they're in trouble, instead they talk to our forensic interviewers who are just everyday people who go through hundreds and hundreds of hours of training in how do I talk to a kid and get their story in a way that doesn't further harm them, in a way that it's recorded so that they don't have to keep repeating that story. It's what happens when you tell a story over and over and over again.
Right.
It changes, not because we're lying, because that's how our funky human brains work.
Sure.
And it doesn't keep them in their trauma. And the most important piece is the interviewers, they don't react. And that's important because for so many kids, that interview, it's the one opportunity for them to tell their story without any adult emotional interference, which means it's their one opportunity to just tell the story and own the story and only worry about themselves, which can be an incredibly healing experience. From there, we have therapy services available for both the child and for the family of that child, because we know that a kid's ability to be okay is in direct proportion to the adults around them ability to be okay. And all of that, of course, is at no cost to the client.
I'm curious too, is it the kind of thing where if I'm somebody who suspects there's some kind of abuse, be it against a child or not, can I reach out to Solace to say, I don't know what to do now?
Yes, absolutely. You can call our hotline 24/7. So if that wakes you up at 2:00 in the morning, it's that nagging thought, you can call and talk to a trained advocate who is either a staff member or a volunteer who can say, yeah, what you're feeling is totally right on. Yes, you need to report. This is how. Do you want to do that together?
Okay, that makes sense. One of the other things that you do in the community is that you teach trans one-on-one classes to schools, businesses, so forth and so on. Can you give us an idea about why that's such a valuable workshop for people to get involved with?
So why we do this as the Rape Crisis Center is back, some little history here. Back in the late 90s, Solace, then called Santa Fe Rape Crisis, did something pretty radical. And they said, homophobia is a form of sexual violence, which today, not a big deal to say that. But in 1997, that was a very big deal. And they started working on programming in the schools, in Santa Fe public schools, that was specifically addressing homophobia. Some years later, transphobia, also a thing, also a form of sexual violence. Now, research into what works in preventing sexual violence specifically is really new. I'm talking the last 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And what the radical people at the Centers for Disease Control found was that to address sexual violence, you have to get at the roots. And we now know that homophobia and transphobia, they're not only forms of sexual violence, they're deeply embedded in the roots of violence itself. Because sexual violence is rooted in rigid gender norms. The idea that men have to be this and women have to be this. So we said, hey, what better way to reduce rigid gender norms than by making our communities safer for trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary people? Because when we do that, we make our communities safer for everyone. So that's why we do this as a form of sexual violence prevention. The side equal benefit is that it makes our community safer for trans folks who we know experience health disparities at incredible, terrible rates across the board.
Okay. It's interesting you say that. I mean, I even in trying to undo my own homophobia and transphobia in the last, X number of years, I'll look back at even just a sitcom like Friends where most of the jokes are, don't let anyone think you're gay, because that's the worst thing there is. Or more recently, comedians, Ricky Gervais has been very vocally transphobic. Dave Chappelle has been in the news lately. He had the Netflix specials where he made some very transphobic jokes. And then he goes on SNL after Biden is, becomes president-elect. And suddenly everybody's like, oh, Chappelle, he's such a genius. And, yes, I think Chappelle is very funny. However, these are very harmful things. And he cited a trans friend that he had, Daphne Dorman, I believe their name was, who has since died. And it seemed like a very well, this is okay. I have a trans friend. I can make trans jokes. So maybe you can kind of tell us why, the history of laughing at a man in a dress or saying, I can't do pronouns. Who knows how to do pronouns? Why is that so harmful?
So Jen Richards is brilliant. If anyone does not know of her, look her up. She has some incredible Twitter threads and such where she was actually in the Disclosure movie that just came out on Netflix that Laverne Cox produced, I believe, directed,
Yeah.
possibly. It's brilliant, but
It's so good.
it's so good. So that documentary goes into why the man in the dress trope is so harmful. So I'll do a few things. So one, it's harmful because the idea that transgender people are tricking folks to being attracted to them has some significant real world consequences. I'm going to talk about violence for the next like 30 seconds. So in this country, transgender women of color have a 1 in 8 chance of being murdered. White trans women have a 1 in 12 chance of being murdered. And so often those murders take place in the context of a cisgender straight man being attracted to a transgender woman, either in the case of street harassment or in the case of being in a relationship. And either he finds out that he's attracted to a transgender woman and his masculinity is so threatened by that he causes her harm, or his friends find out and his masculinity is so threatened that he causes her harm. So it has real world consequences that leads to Transgender Day of Remembrance is coming up next week. What is time? I have no idea. It's coming up this month. Sure. And every year we remember, unfortunately, the 20 plus every year people in this country who are murdered, transgender people who are murdered, mostly transgender women, mostly trans women of color, right? Because that very idea. So going to jokes, many things can be true at once. Dave Chappelle can be a genius and hilarious and still cause harm. We can hold both thoughts at once. It's okay. The jokes about transgender people, one, they're boring. They're not good jokes.
Lazy.
It's not great comedy. Yeah, you can do better than that. If you were a genius, do better than that. Right. 2, good comedy, and his good comedy is rooted in punching up, not punching down. It's right. Rooted in making fun of the system. It's rooted in making fun of the people in power, not those who are harmed by so many people in this culture. It's just boring comedy. You can do better than that. And we can simultaneously say you are a genius and you need to do better. Both can be true.
Sure. And I think it kind of speaks to this, this binary idea that, someone is either perfect or they're horrible, or a joke is either, great or it's horrible. Like, why do we need those so badly?
You know what? I think part of it is wrapped up in this idea of ally as an identity. So I have a transgender friend thing is wrapped up in, oh, no, I can do anything and get away with it because I have a transgender friend, because I am an ally. When we have this like ally as an identity thing, there's a lot of pressure there. And it means that if I make a mistake, it's an identity that can be taken from me.
Interesting.
And I like thinking of allyship as a daily practice. It's something I do every day. I like it because 1, it keeps us accountable, but 2, it takes a lot of the pressure off. It means that if I make a mistake, I'm not a bad person. It means that I'm a person and I made a mistake and I need to be accountable to that and make it better and not do it again. But it doesn't mean anything is taken from me. This identity is taken from me.
I like that idea. Local trans artist activist Anastasia Rebel. It's Rebel or Rubel. I can never remember, and my apologies to them if they watch this, because you want to talk about genius. Anastasia's got it. They once told me, like, don't think of it about like allyship. Think of it about like you're an accomplice. That seems so like active to me.
Yeah, totally.
I think too with the Chappelle thing, doesn't that kind of like, if you're saying I can say whatever I want about trans people and it's fine because I have a trans friend, doesn't that kind of put like an unfair onus on the trans person? Like, you are my get out of jail free. That sucks.
Yeah. And it says that we are a monolith and one elected trans person can speak for us, right? That's like the Caitlyn Jenner thing. Like, when I do trans education, I always have to talk about Caitlyn Jenner because people know who she is. But I started off by saying, I wish I didn't have to talk about Caitlyn Jenner. As a blanket statement, she's not the transgender spokesperson. We did not vote for her, but most of you know who she is. So let's talk about Caitlyn Jenner. It's hard with the lack of visibility in for trans people, right? We're a good 20, 30 years behind the, especially white, moneyed gay and lesbian movement in terms of legal protection, social acceptance, media representation. That lack of representation means that we have these very few people to speak about trans issues, right, and whose lives become the marker for everyone to understand who we are. When in reality, there are as many trans experiences as there are trans people. And saying, well, I have this one trans friend who's fine with it, doesn't mean a thing. It means your one trans friend is fine with it.
Interesting. Okay. So Jess, I wanted to talk to you too about parenthood at this point in human history. We were talking a little bit before, I think schools and, what the hell am I going to do with my kid? I don't have a kid, so I don't know. And that's what I'm asking. Jess, you have a 3-year-old daughter, and
as far as we know.
As far as we know. And they, you had said that it's a blessing having them home. It's terrifying at the same time. Can you kind of talk to, apologies for those dings. Can you kind of speak to, like, I'm in a pandemic, never experienced it. My partner and I, we've got this kid. What is that day to day?
So we are incredibly fortunate. Our kid is at a home daycare. We moved her into a really small home daycare from her bigger school, of course. About 2 months into the pandemic, we had her home for 2 months. And after 2 months, with both of us trying to work at home full time, a 3-year-old is not a kid who you can be like, you go entertain yourself and read some books. Here, I'll set you up with some projects. See you in an hour. No, 3-year-old is constant attention, me, which is developmentally appropriate and exactly what they should be doing. But it meant that we were getting no work done. So we moved her into a home daycare. So we're really fortunate because she's at a place where we feel like where we feel safer. Safe is such a funny word right now. We feel safer, and she's there a few days a week, and that's amazing. She's still home a lot more, and the summertime without all of the activities was really interesting. On one hand, it was so hard to not have, okay, let's do all the things to entertain you. And I felt sad that she was missing out on the bandstand and the music on the hill and all of the summer magic that Santa Fe brings. On the other hand, she's 3 years old and she's happy just being with us. And she's in a really safe home. And so many kids are not in that space. Having a kid is so hard, and it's also this incredible blessing. At no point have I felt bored during the pandemic. Not once, not a one moment. I would love to feel bored for just like an hour. That would be awesome. But I've not been bored at all. Constantly entertained and challenged. And 3 years old is hilarious. Oh my God,
dad said it's like having a drunk dog who slowly learns to speak well.
Yeah, this one, and then they start making up songs.
Awesome.
Yes, the songs, they're fantastic.
I bet. I mean, so between your work, between the parenthood, and your partner as well works for the Mountain Center, yeah?
Resolve, my mistake,
yeah. Resolve. We're hearing so much about self-care. It's important to do self-care. So here you are, a couple who are both doing this very important work around these things. How do you do that? How do you care for yourselves?
I work out during Zoom meetings. That's how I care for myself.
Are you working out as we speak?
As we speak, doing leg lifts. No, I'm not right now. Yeah, it's parenting, getting time for yourself is hard, period. During a pandemic, it's near impossible. But we have more resources. We have each other. We have a really supportive, loving partnership. And we make time for the other one to get to do the things that bring us whatever joy. Self-care, it's such a funny thing to talk about because it's become this whole industry when actually self-care is just like remembering to drink enough water one day. And self-care is so relative to your situation. Like when things are really bad, self-care means like I stopped looking at Facebook for 1 hour on the day before the election, right?
That sounds wise.
on the best days, self-care is going for a hike and eating a delicious home-cooked meal and reading. I don't know. It's such a hard thing because it's right now. I don't know what's self-care. What is good? Like our scale is changed. Like when people ask, how are you? My new answer is, I'm COVID fine, which is its own version of fine.
Yes, I'm not. I'm living indoors still.
Yeah.
My kind of scale. Am I living indoors? Am I still employed? Great. I wanted to talk to you too a little bit about the election. And again, like, let's be clear that we're both on the same page about like, no queer or trans or anybody speaks for all people, but you, Jess Clark, notable community member, hardworking hack enthusiast. Are you feeling relief over the election? How are you feeling now?
I was definitely feeling relief over the weekend, but now I'm less so. I follow Chase Strangeau, who's brilliant. He's a lawyer for the ACLU, and he tracks all of the anti-transgender bills that are being pre-filed for the spring legislative sessions across the country. And wow, there are so many anti-trans bills being filed. And so that is always really unnerving. That's
disappointing.
Every time there's representation, increase in representation, there's backlash. Increase in representation, backlash. And so it's unnerving, it's worrying, all of those things. You know, I'm gonna be okay, but Supreme Court meant that my partner and I started rushing adopting my daughter, my adoption of my daughter, because what happens if gay marriage goes away? Because ours is technically a gay marriage. And if something should happen, fearing not being able to have my daughter, be with my daughter. So those things are, of course, really scary. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be okay. I'm more worried about how all of this legislation can harm the trans people who are already so harmed in our world, right? I'm a white transgender guy in Santa Fe.
Right.
I'm treated pretty well most of the time. I'm not even known as trans most of the time. And so many folks don't have that and are harmed every day, no matter who the administration is.
I was a little surprised how quickly people were just like, well, it's not Trump, so whatever it is fine. And like, I agree that like that day that we learned he'd been voted out, like, great, let's all feel great today. Kamala is a great example though of somebody who has some pretty transphobic stuff in her past as far as fighting to, you know, keep trans women still classified as men in prisons, etc. So by no means does this mean, hey, everybody's safe now, let's just pack it in and let them do whatever. But then I do look to things like in North Carolina, where that trans legislator was elected in the same city where the bathroom bill, the anti-trans bathroom bill came about. And I think, okay, like this is better than it was 5 years ago. And I'm cis and I'm straight and I'm white, so nothing affects me, let's be clear there. But again, not that you speak for all people, but looking over the past 5 years, is there good reason to be hopeful for the next 5?
Yeah, I think there is, in terms of guidance, like guidance for public schools that have protective policies for transgender and gender nonconforming, non-binary students that say students can go use the bathrooms that align with their gender. They can do extracurriculars that align with their gender. They can be called by their correct names and pronouns. Those things are huge. They are important. They have a direct, significant impact on the lives of so many transgender young people. The guidance from the Obama administration was rescinded by the current administration. Right. And of course, we would assume that would go back into play. I like, I can't remember who said it, that national politics, it's not about electing the perfect people, it's about electing the people, it's about choosing your foes, choosing who you get to move, choosing whether you're on offense or defense. And now we're going to hopefully not have to just beat back the terrible, and we can actually have room to breathe and think about imagining a future, a better future for all of us in so many ways. The day after the election, or the day after the final, yay, it's happening, or the pre-final, or the whatever it is. I felt myself just exhale and think about, oh, wow, when we're not constantly battling for basic survival, will we be able to have the room to think bigger and imagine something better? I hope so.
I would hope so too. Okay. So we've got just a couple minutes left here. Boy, it just flew by for me.
Oh my gosh, that was very fast.
You and me, Jess, I love talking to you. So I thought we could spend the last couple minutes on Solace. How can people get involved? What do they need to know? What can we do? If we say we wanted to donate, for example.
Please donate. You can donate at findsolace.org. That's as in you are looking for, and then you find Solace, SOLACE.org.
Love it.
We pre-pandemic had experienced a 30% increase in need for services over the last couple of years. So we suddenly had a waiting list for the first time in a decade. And at one point that waiting list was 6 months. And that was not for lack of trying to see as many people as possible, but because of that increase in need, it's not like resources increase at proportional rates. And so we couldn't just keep hiring more and more therapists and more advocates. So the need is there. The need is increasing. We always need people to show up, and donating to Solace isn't just a monetary gift. Mm-hmm. Every time someone donates to Solace, it's one more person who we know is a part of this larger community of care. I like donations, especially from people in my generation. I'm an elder millennial, and we give at very high rates. We give smaller amounts at very high rates, but every time we give, that's an organization, that's a political candidate who we are now in community with.
Sure.
Giving isn't just about the money, it's about being in community. And we are really looking to expand our community, not just in giving, but in knowing that there are so many more people in the world who are here to support survivors in Santa Fe.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that you add while we still have you?
We have a 24-hour crisis line. It is for anyone who's experienced sexual, domestic, or other violent crimes. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 2 o'clock in the morning, it is there. And that number is 505-986-9111. That's 505-986-9111. We are there.
Excellent. And well, we're going to make sure that we link to Solace as well as include that phone number and everything once we post this on YouTube for real. So Jess, Clark, boy, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. And as for the rest of you out there who may be watching, this was the first of our Bring a Friend series featuring Jess Clark of the Solace Crisis Treatment Center. We've got a number of these lined up for the coming weeks. Myself and Catherine Lewin will be speaking to attorney Daniel Halem, artist Tigre Bailando. It's going to be every Thursday at 5:30. I do want to mention that part of this is to help us raise funds through our Friends of the Reporter campaign. If you go to sfreporter.com/friends, you can learn more in there. If you donate, like right after this, we will automatically put you into a drawing for a $50 gift card from 2nd Street Brewery. So they've got great beer. They just want a beer medal. That's all I'm saying. Once again, Alex DeVore, culture editor, Jess Clark, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Bye.